Please give him a warm welcome, Klaas Knot.
So, hello everyone, once more. And also I should say happy birthday, because it's the 30th birthday of the Maastricht Treaty that I understand we are celebrating here. And what of course would be a better place to celebrate this than here in the Statenzaal, the very sort of room where the Maastricht Treaty was signed. I must say I remember this historic event also vividly, because this week in December 1991 that Roel was just referring to, I happened to be in Maastricht as well, because I was a first-year PhD student, and by then, claimants will remember, we had the network of quantitative economics. They held these master classes, and that week there was a master class hosted by the Maastricht University here in town. Of course, we didn't get any close to where the negotiations was taking place because of all the security, etc. So we pendled between the university and at Vrijthof. But other than that, it was impressive to sort of be so close to where it all was happening. And yeah, that was a vivid memory, just like I also vividly remembered what happened only a few years ago, the start of all of this, and that was of course the fall of the Berlin Wall. It led to the rise of the Economic and Monetary Union, because it was logical that after 1989, Germany once again wanted to become a unified nation. But other European nations, and principally the French, were quite hesitant. A unified Germany would de facto set the economic and monetary tone for a lot of other European countries, and so those countries were keen to ensure that a reunified Germany would remain embedded in a united Europe. And that is why discussions on the Economic and Monetary Union gained momentum, eventually leading to the deal between Mitterrand and Kohl. Unification for you, the euro for us. Well, I think that was clearly a win-win situation. I see already somebody disagreeing with me. That's good news for the panel later on. But at least we do have unification and we do have the euro, whether it was a deal or not. So now, for the past 20 years, I would say that the euro has been the bedrock, the very bedrock of our single market. Because the absence of the exchange rate movements has been an impressive impetus for prosperity in the entire euro area, but not the least in the Netherlands. That was actually the one element that I was missing from the talk on the Dutch perspective on, let's say, European integration. We are the number one or number two, how you count, perhaps Luxembourg, okay, beneficiary of European integration, and that should never be forgotten. Being a unified economic bloc has also brought a lot of stability. And as a central banker, that is, of course, music to my ears. But, indeed, there is a small but. At the start of the Economic and Monetary Union in 1999, per capita income levels between countries differed significantly. And it was expected that Economic and Monetary Union would actually level these differences over time. It was expected that countries that had catching up to do would experience faster growth thanks to the Economic and Monetary Union, and that we would see some sustainable economic convergence in Europe. To some extent, this happened. But, and here it is, it did not happen quite as across the board as we expected. In terms of real GDP per capita, we mainly saw east-west convergence. So between the original 12 countries on the one hand, and the 7, soon 8 countries that joined later on the other hand. So it is no wonder that despite the past crisis, and despite also the pervasive pessimism that you hear in some European corners, despite all of this, a lot of countries are still very, very eager to join our economic and monetary union. But as far as north-south convergence goes, the first decade of the euro indeed demonstrated the expected economic convergence within the original group of member states as well. However, much of that convergence actually proved unsustainable and disappeared again after the global financial crisis. And in 2010, the Economic and Monetary Union even suffered a crisis that threatened its very existence and the very existence of the euro with it. And I think this experience has taught us that it is much harder to achieve convergence that goes beyond the initial convergence that comes with the entry into the euro area. And this further convergence will only be possible when we address a number of the design flaws in the euro area's construction. And design flaws, I would also add, that the signatories to the treaty did not expect nor foresee. Now, as you may remember, the way out of the 2010 euro crisis consisted of acute collective help for individual countries and banks, but also the creation of several European institutions to increase the EMU's resilience. We now have a common supervisor of major financial institutions. We have a single resolution fund for failing banks, and we have the European Stability Mechanism to help when sovereign nations get into trouble. And more recently, we also set up the Recovery and Resilience Facility to collectively and effectively tackle the economic outfall of the pandemic. So now that the EMU has proven itself to be an adaptive project, where do we go from here? And this is, of course, mainly, again, a political question. While the euro crisis was an impetus for improvement, for making further progress, we currently find that EMU is too much at a standstill. And to get past that, the following political question needs to be resolved at the very least. What should be done first? Increase risk sharing in the EMU or decrease existing risks within individual member states? Now, I'm a central banker, and of course I look at these things from an economic standpoint. And in that capacity, I can only say that the longer this standstill lasts, the more vulnerabilities between euro countries will grow, the deeper future economic crisis may be, the more emergency support will then be needed, and the less prosperity we will have, all of us, including those that benefit the most from European integration. So for me, as an economist, too long a standstill is not an option and should not be an option. We must go forward, and whatever way you look at it, going forward means at least partly increasing risk sharing. And with that I mean cross-border risk sharing. It simply means using the strength that is in our numbers to absorb possible shocks. And when I talk about cross-border risk sharing, I of course have to distinguish between public and private risk sharing. The first, public risk sharing, goes through the governments, fiscal budgets, Brussels and the like. The second goes to private credit and asset markets. Now, if you compare oneself to another monetary union, for instance, like the United States, both amounts of risk sharing in the European Union are very low. But this is especially true for private risk sharing. If you look at the US experience, actually most interstate differences in growth performance are smoothed out because of private risk sharing through banking and capital markets. So to bolster such risk sharing also in the euro area, we need first a stronger banking union. The global financial crisis and the pandemic has demonstrated to us that the banking sector and the public sector are very closely linked financially, and that risks also easily find their way onto banks' balance sheet. To some extent, we should use this channel to smooth the economic cycle and to absorb shocks more evenly, to increase our resilience, but of course, without repeating the mistakes of the past in which depositors and taxpayers ultimately took the hit. Alongside the European supervision and resolution authorities that I already mentioned, the completion of the banking union with a common deposit insurance program would also greatly contribute to economic and financial resilience. Together with risk-based capital requirements on sovereign exposures, a European deposit guarantee scheme would de-link the financial health of banks from the countries in which they are headquartered. Additionally, the presence of a common deposit guarantee scheme would also function as the foundation for deep integration of banking credit markets. And this would significantly diminish the risk of crisis spilling over national borders and causing financial distress in other EU countries. It would also enable banks to better absorb local economic shocks and thus increase economic resilience. In addition to a stronger banking union, we also need a stronger capital markets union to bolster private risk sharing. Well-developed and integrated capital markets lead to more risks being shared privately. They reduce systemic risk, and they also stimulate diversification of the funding mix of corporates. All this adds to our resilience as an economic and monetary union. In theory, the EMU opened the way for the free movement of capital. But in practice, we see that European financing remains too one-sided. Firms and households depend too much on banks, and the home bias of both investors and banks is persistent. So we are not using the numbers in our union to decrease risk. Cross-border risk sharing remains low. And one reason, of course, could have to do with cross-border public risk sharing. And here too, I'm referring to the past to learn about where to go in the future. Because I know of very few historical examples where strong cross-border private risk sharing developed without or before a significant degree of cross-border public risk sharing. So to some degree, the two are complements rather than substitutes, and a successful monetary union, like the Economic and Monetary Union, will need both. The recent Recovery and Resilience Facility that I already mentioned is a telling example of such cross-border public risk sharing. The fund was set up to temporarily support public investments in the energy transition and in digital projects all over Europe. Investments that strengthen the economic growth potential and thus the capacity of the EU as a whole to absorb shocks, including in those countries facing greater financial constraints. The RRF is temporary because continuous large transfers of public funds would make this project vulnerable from a political perspective. However, I do believe that the mere existence of this successful cross-border public risk sharing provides a lot of hope for the future. Because the matter of the fact is that some public goods, like climate, like energy market, and this is in no means meant to be exhaustive, are simply more efficiently arranged at the European level. Over the years, the euro area has grown from 12 to 19 countries, and soon 20. Almost 350 million people now live in the Economic and Monetary Union. So, as an economist, it just makes an awful lot of sense to use the strength in our numbers, to use our strength to achieve shared goals. And to do that, we need to share funds and also to share risks. I'm an economist, but as a central bank governor, I also need to be a realist. So I'm well aware of the political hurdles that must be overcome if we are to increase risk sharing. But looking at what we have achieved so far, I might just be, above all, an optimist. 30 years ago, the Maastricht Treaty set out a vision. And in the past 30 years, we have witnessed a tremendous economic and political accomplishment of that vision. Of course, we're not there yet, and the EMU remains work in progress. But let's keep working on that progress. We have 30 years of experience to learn from, 30 years of crisis and successes, of design flaws and great innovation, of opportunities for reform that we may have missed, but also opportunities for prosperity gains that we did seize. So let's learn from these 30 years, politicians, economists, everyone. Let's learn from them and then lift our economic and monetary union to the next level. So again, happy birthday to the Maastricht Treaty. I'm looking forward to our progress in the next 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you.